Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1948 Chiles-Whitted Sighting, plunges deeper into the historical bedrock of ufology, dissecting the chilling details of the 1948 Chiles-Whitted Sighting, a near-catastrophic encounter that pushed the U.S. military to draft a top-secret intelligence document, concluding that UFOs were interplanetary, only for the Air Force to panic and try to burn the evidence out of existence. At approximately 2:45 a.m. on July 24, 1948, Eastern Airlines Flight 510, a twin-engine Douglas DC-3 cruising peacefully at an altitude of 5,000 feet, was cutting through a brilliant, moonlit summer sky over Montgomery, Alabama. The atmospheric conditions were pristine, offering exceptional night visibility, clear horizons, and an undisturbed view of the starry expanse. Suddenly, the routine red-eye transport transformed into a terrifying brush with the impossible. Captain Clarence S. Chiles and First Officer John B. Whitted watched in sheer horror as a massive, unlit object materialized out of the dark, screaming down on their exact flight path on a dead-center collision course. The structural clarity, physical proximity, and anomalous physics of what they witnessed shattered any easy dismissals of atmospheric distortion, optical illusions, or weather anomalies. The craft was immense, measuring roughly 100 feet in length, comparable in scale to a commercial transport of the era or a captured German V-2 rocket. Yet it defied every known convention of mid-century aeronautical engineering. It was perfectly cylindrical, resembling a smooth, windowed fuel tank, and was entirely wingless and tailless. There were no control surfaces, no stabilizing fins, and no conventional aerodynamic lifting bodies to keep it aloft, operating purely on a mechanism of flight entirely alien to human science. As the behemoth closed the distance at blistering speed, the pilots could clearly discern intricate architectural details along the metallic hull. Running horizontally down the side of the fuselage were two distinct rows of square, luminous windows. These ports emitted a brilliant, intense, deep red inner glow, casting an ambient illumination that strongly suggested an occupied interior, a habitable cabin space, or a functioning operational deck operating under specialized lighting conditions. At the rear of the craft sat its propulsion source, a roaring, dark blue exhaust flame that lacked the characteristic plume, smoke, or thunderous concussive sound of standard mid-century jet-owned rocket engines. As the object reached a critical juncture and banked sharply upward at the absolute last possible second, to avoid tearing through the DC-3, the flight crew and passengers were physically struck by an intense, unmistakable wave of raw, radiating heat washing off the passing engine. Passing within a mere 100 to 300 feet of the starboard side of the airliner, the craft executed an instantaneous vertical climb. With no visible loss of momentum, G-force strain, or transitional drag, it pulled up at a staggering angle, punching effortlessly into the cloud deck at hypersonic speed and vanishing from sight in the blink of an eye. The immediate aftermath left two battle-hardened, veteran airline pilots shaken to their absolute core, staring into an empty sky that had just rewritten the foundational laws of physics. When Chiles and Whitted finally landed and filed their official incident report, it did not merely land on a desk. It detonated like an intelligence bomb through the chain of command, sending immediate, frantic shockwaves straight to the Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC, analysts stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. These weren't rural farmers, hysterical eyewitnesses, or amateur stargazers prone to misidentifying weather balloons or swamp gas. They were battle-hardened elite commercial airline pilots with decades of combined night flight experience, pristine professional reputations, and flawless safety records. Their sensory calibration, spatial awareness, and legal liability made their collective testimony professionally and legally bulletproof. Faced with a sighting that threatened to shatter public confidence and military security alike, ATIC intelligence officers desperately scrambled to construct a rational terrestrial explanation. Operating under the strict working assumption that the object had to be a classified domestic asset, they launched an exhaustive, high-priority internal audit. Investigators cross-referenced every ultra-secret aerospace testing log, Every experimental rocket program, every drone initiative, and every classified black-budget flight schedule across every military base, testing ground, and contractor facility in the United States. The dragnet was absolute. The final response from the nation's premier research installations came back entirely empty. No U.S. rocket, experimental lifting body, or advanced prototype was in the air over Alabama that night. With domestic options exhausted, intelligence officers widened the geopolitical lens to evaluate America's primary Cold War rival. Yet the conclusion there was even more stark. It unequivocally wasn't Soviet. In July 1948, the Soviet Union was still years away from developing or deploying a 100-foot-long, windowed, wingless craft capable of controlled, high-speed atmospheric flight and hypersonic vertical climbs. The military was left staring into a terrifying abyss of absolute technological inferiority. They were forced to confront a reality where an unknown intelligence was operating unhindered over sovereign American airspace, with capabilities that rendered the world's most advanced air forces completely obsolete. Exhibit A, the lost estimate of the situation, the Chiles-Whitted Sighting holds monumental, almost mythical status in the history of military ufology because of what it triggered behind closed doors within the Pentagon's deepest, most heavily guarded intelligence sanctuaries. When the Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC, analysts at Wright-Patterson sat down in late 1948 to compile the legendary estimate of the situation formal, top-secret military intelligence report intended for the highest-ranking brass in the Pentagon, the Chiles-Whitted encounter was not merely included, it was selected as Exhibit A. ATIC analysts recognized that the encounter provided the hard, structural, and physical baseline required to move past vague meteorological quirks or mass hysteria. The distinct cylindrical hull, the glowing square windows, the thermal radiation signature, and the hypersonic vertical climb offered concrete metrics that proved the phenomenon was an intelligently controlled, nuts and bolts craft operating light years ahead of human engineering. Following exhaustive cross-examinations of the flight crew and corroborating radar data, the authors of the estimate arrived at a staggering, paradigm-shattering conclusion. The objects were not secret terrestrial tech or Soviet prototypes. They were interplanetary spacecraft. However, the official military bureaucracy was utterly unequipped to handle the truth of its own findings. When the formal report landed on the desk of Air Force Chief of Staff General Hoyt Vandenberg, he was reportedly horrified by its explicit, unvarnished implications, admitting to the public and the White House that the United States military was completely defenseless against an advanced, non-human intelligence would trigger nationwide panic, shatter public trust, and destabilize the fragile Cold War economy. Exercising absolute command authority, General Vandenberg officially rejected the report's conclusions and took the unprecedented step of ordering every single copy of the estimate of the situation burned and incinerated. The military apparatus actively sought to force the extraterrestrial genie back into the classified bottle, pretending the document had never existed. Yet, history cannot be completely reduced to ash. The memory of Eastern Airlines Flight 510 could not be purged from the records. Captain Chiles and First Officer Whitted hadn't simply glimpsed an ambiguous light in the dark. They had locked eyes with the future of propulsion and design as it screamed past them at 2 a.m. over Alabama. Their harrowing encounter sent a silent, terrifying message to the architects of American defense. Humanity was playing with primitive, explosive toys in a sandbox, while an unknown, superior intelligence quietly commanded the skies. In military and intelligence terminology, an estimate of the situation is not a list labeled with letters like Exhibit A, Exhibit B, and Exhibit C. Rather, it is a formal, standardized format used by the U.S. Armed Forces to evaluate a critical strategic problem, assess enemy capabilities, and determine the best course of action. In the case of Project Sign in 1948, the entire document was the estimate, and the Chiles-Whitted UFO encounter was designated as Exhibit A within that report because it served as the prime piece of hard evidence. To put it simply, there was no Exhibit B. The Chiles-Whitted sighting stood alone as the definitive, most credible anchor case of the report. ATIC analysts relied on Flight 510 because it provided the specific physical metrics, dimensions, structural windows, thermal exhaust, and controlled flight behavior That separated a serious national security anomaly from vague lights in the sky. When General Hoyt Vandenberg rejected and ordered the incineration of the document, the entire dossier, Exhibit A and all, disappeared into the classified ash. The 1948 Chiles-Whitted Sighting did much more than nearly cause a mid-air disaster over Montgomery, Alabama. It acted as a seismic fracture point that permanently altered the relationship between the U.S. military, the geopolitical establishment, and the nascent field of ufology. While thousands of ordinary citizens had reported strange lights in the post-World War II years, the near collision of Eastern Airlines Flight 510 forced the national security apparatus to confront an uncomfortable reality. The skies were no longer under human control. Before July 1948, military intelligence officials at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base could easily brush off UFO reports as weather balloons, swamp gas, optical illusions, or civilian hysteria. Because the witnesses were elite, battle-hardened airline pilots with flawless safety records, the military could not dismiss them as cranks. When the exhaustive domestic audit revealed 0 U.S. prototypes in the air, and intelligence confirmed the Soviets lacked the technology, the military faced a terrifying credibility crisis. The sighting forced the Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC, to institutionalize UFO investigations seriously, leading directly to the creation of Project Sign, the predecessor to Project Blue Book. The military was trapped in a double bind. They knew something advanced was violating sovereign airspace, but admitting they were utterly defenseless would shatter Cold War morale and invite public panic. The geopolitical fallout of the Chiles-Whitted case reshaped how governments handle national security information regarding anomalous phenomena. By enshrining Flight 510 as the primary anchor case Exhibit A, in their top-secret assessment that UFOs were interplanetary, ATIC analysts forced high command to make a historic choice. When General Hoyt Vandenberg ordered the incineration of the estimate, it established a dangerous blueprint for the Cold War state. It proved that the military-industrial complex preferred managed ignorance and public deception over transparently admitting technological inferiority. It birthed the modern deny and ridicule template that would govern UFO disclosures for the next 7 decades. For the study of unidentified aerial phenomena, the Chiles-Whitted encounter was a foundational milestone. Up until 1948, many casual observers thought of UFOs as ephemeral lights or weather anomalies. The Chiles-Whitted report introduced concrete, physical parameters, a 100-foot cylindrical fuselage, glowing square windows, thermal heat signatures, and hypersonic vertical climbs. It proved to researchers that whatever was visiting Earth was physical, engineered, and operating under an intelligence completely foreign to human science. For generations of civilian ufologists, the Chiles-Whitted case became the gold standard of credibility. It served as proof that long before commercial media sensationalized flying saucers, elite professionals were already encountering sleek, silent, windowed craft that mocked human aviation physics. The Chiles-Whitted sighting changed the trajectory of modern history by forcing a collision between human military hubris and an unyielding unknown. It proved that governments would rather burn their own intelligence reports and feign ignorance than admit that humanity was no longer the apex intelligence in the skies. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. If elite airline pilots nearly collide with a massive windowed craft that military intelligence cannot explain, why is the burden of proof still placed on the witness rather than the institution hiding the files?